Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take a massive stack of articles, biographies, and research and turn them into the most essential, fascinating, and thoroughly engaging conversation you'll have this week.
That's right. If you want a shortcut to being truly well-informed, you've come to the right place.
Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into a man who, arguably, provided the soundtrack for the entire American century.
A man whose personal journey is, it's the definitive rags to riches story, yet whose methods were, well, wildly unconventional.
We are talking about Irving Berlin.
And when we say define the 20th century, that's not hyperbole.
Not at all. Berlin, born Israel Isidore Bilan, had an active career spanning an astounding 60 years. 60. And in that time, he composed an estimated 1,500 songs.
Just think about that volume, the sheer reach of it. He penned everything from, the high society dances of the 1920s to the somber military anthems of 2 world wars.
All the way through to your favorite holiday soundtrack, it's inescapable.
And it's not just the quantity, it's the consensus among his peers. Before we even get into his journey, you have to grasp the sheer magnitude of his influence.
The sources are full of testimonials from other musical titans.
Exactly. Like Jerome Kern, the composer of Showboat. He didn't hedge his praise at all. He famously said, "Irving Berlin has no place in American music. He is American music."
Whoa. That elevates him from just a talent to, a national necessity?
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
It suggests that if you remove Berlin's work, a fundamental piece of the American cultural identity is just gone.
And George Gershwin, another revolutionary figure, felt the same way. He called him the greatest songwriter that has ever lived.
And he even went so far as to dub him America's Schubert.
That Gershwin comparison is fascinating, especially because of how Berlin created his songs. Schubert was a master of classical structure.
Right, while Berlin achieved his immortality through methods that were, frankly, closer to ingenious accident than any formal training. He really embodied that American spirit of, ingenuity and adaptation.
So what does this all mean for us today? Our mission in this deep dive is to trace that incredible trajectory. We're going to follow the Bilan family from fleeing Russian persecution
To the crowded, chaotic streets of the Lower East Side.
We'll spend a lot of time dissecting that bizarre yet essential mechanical advantage he developed, that custom transposing piano and his complete reliance on the key of F-sharp.
And we'll also analyze how his unique life experience, that of an outsider who loved his adopted country so fiercely, allowed him to create these enduring patriotic statements like, "God bless America."
And the single best-selling song of all time, White Christmas. We want to show you exactly how this Russian immigrant became the definitive voice of the American dream.
And just to set the stage for this long career, here's a pretty intriguing fact to start with. Berlin lived an incredibly long life. He died in 1989 at 101 years old.
And his career wasn't just long, it was universally celebrated. He is one of the very few artists to collect all the major honors: an Academy Award, a Grammy, a Tony.
And the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which he received in 1977. That kind of longevity and, universal acclaim is just, it's truly unmatched.
So to really understand the architect of the Great American Songbook, we have to start not on Broadway, but in the turmoil of the Russian Empire. He was born Israel Bilan on May 11th, 1888.
The sources indicate his family was Jewish, and they came from a shtetl called Tolokin, which is in modern-day Belarus.
His father, Moses, was an itinerant cantor, so he traveled around leading religious services.
And that tradition of oral music and performance was, it was certainly the first exposure young Israel had to melody and rhythm.
But although the family was associated with Tolokin, some biographers suggest Berlin was actually born further east in Tyumen, Siberia.
Right, where his father had taken the family for a time. But regardless of the exact birthplace, the fundamental reality was that life for Jews in the Russian Empire was precarious and often brutal.
They were fleeing the constant threat of pogroms, of systemic discrimination.
It was a desperate, urgent decision to leave everything behind. The Berlin family arrived at Ellis Island in New York Harbor on September 14, 1893. Israel was just 5 years old.
And when he looked back on those first 5 years in Russia later in life, he had very few distinct memories. But the one memory that stuck, the one that really captured the trauma that drove them west, it was intensely vivid.
It's such a striking, painful detail. Biographer Lawrence Bergreen records Berlin recalling just lying on a blanket next to a road, watching his family's house burn to the ground.
That single terrifying image, the loss of home, the violence, That was the defining context for his family's entire move to America.
It really underscores the immense gratitude he felt later in life for the country that sheltered them.
But the sanctuary they found in New York was steeped in poverty. The Berlin family first settled in this cramped basement flat on Monroe Street.
Before moving to a three-room tenement at 330 Cherry Street, right in the heart of the bustling and often squalid Lower East Side.
It was life at the very bottom of the economic ladder. His father, Moses, couldn't find steady work as a cantor in New York.
So he did what he could. He worked in a kosher meat market. He taught Hebrew lessons. Berlin later said he didn't even realize they were poor because everyone around him was living the same way. But the struggle was immense.
And that difficult support structure just crumbled when Moses died suddenly. Israel was only 13.
At that point, the responsibility of providing fell heavily on the children. It's just a heartbreaking story.
His mother worked as a midwife. His sisters had these grueling jobs wrapping cigars.
While his older brother toiled in a garment sweatshop. And young Israel, he started working as a newspaper boy, hawking the evening journal on the streets.
Biographers highlight this really crucial detail about why he left home before he was even 14.
Because his meager earnings from selling papers contributed less to the family budget than his sister's income.
So he felt worthless, a burden. He decided to strike out on his own, joining the city's vast population of homeless immigrant youth.
He was living in what you can only describe as Dickensian lodging houses in the Bowery. These cheap, brutal, crowded sleeping rooms.
And the sources emphasize his determination even then. There's that incredible story about him falling into the East River.
Yes, while delivering papers, he paused, just mesmerized, watching a ship depart for China, probably daydreaming of an escape.
And a swinging crane just knocked him into the water.
When they finally fished him out, after he'd gone down 3 times, he was still fiercely clutching the 5 pennies he had earned that day in his clenched fist.
That image is so potent. It's the sheer will to survive, the absolute value of every single coin. That defined his early existence.
Fortunately, he quickly realized that his best asset wasn't delivering papers. It was his voice, a gift he inherited from his cantor father.
He started singing popular songs in the saloons and dive bars at the Bowery. And this wasn't just entertainment, it was market research.
Exactly. He was learning in real time which simple sentiments appealed to audiences, because the quicker they tossed a penny, the better the song was.
He became incredibly streetwise, just absorbing the American vernacular and culture.
This led him up the ladder to becoming a song plugger and a singing waiter. By 1906, at 18, he got a better job at the Pelham Cafe in Chinatown.
Besides pouring drinks, he specialized in singing these made-up, sometimes blue or suggestive parodies of hit songs. It was a huge draw for the patrons.
And this is where the journey to composing really begins. His first published song, Marie from Sunny Italy, came out in 1907.
He wrote it with the Pelham's pianist, Mike Nicholson. The sources quibble over whether he got 33 or 37 cents for the publishing rights.
A literal pittance either way. But he did get that important credit. Berlin. His talents quickly outgrew the Chinatown Cafe. Max Winslow from the Harry Von Tilser Company spotted his talent.
Right. He recognized his knack for simple, catchy rhyme and got him a job as a staff lyricist with the Ted Snyder Company in 1909. For a couple of years, he was known just as a top wordsmith.
But his pivot into composition was, well, it was entirely accidental. He had submitted a set of lyrics to a publisher, and the publisher just mistakenly assumed the submission was complete, music and all.
Not wanting to lose the sale, Berlin scrambled and quickly wrote a simple melody right there on the spot.
And that initial quick success just cracked open his career as a full-fledged composer, despite his, let's say, severe technical limitations.
And that leads us directly into the most unique and almost mythical aspect of Irving Berlin's career.
The fact that the man George Gershwin called the greatest songwriter that has ever lived operated for much of his life with these incredible musical limitations.
It's truly mind-boggling. For decades, he couldn't read or write sheet music. He relied entirely on his ear and a musical secretary.
But the most famous limitation was the piano. He was a restricted player, able to play comfortably and naturally in only one key, F sharp.
F sharp major, the
Yeah.
key of the black notes. For anyone who doesn't play piano, this means your hands are primarily on the raised black keys.
Exactly. They're grouped in 2s and 3s, and it feels very different, sort of restrictive, compared to the white keys. Once he learned that pattern, that was his home base.
So I'm imagining a world where a genius musician has access to every sound, but can only physically operate within this one narrow corridor of the keyboard. So how did he write these sophisticated, varied songs that span dozens of keys?
This is where the ingenuity kicks in. He circumvented this massive technical barrier by using a specialized custom piano.
The famous transposing piano.
Exactly. It was equipped with a transposing lever. He owned 3 of them over his lifetime, and they were his essential instruments.
Okay, let's unpack this mechanism. I'm picturing a lever on the side of the piano. How did it actually work?
It was a mechanical marvel. When he pulled the lever, the piano's entire internal action would physically shift. So if he played a melody using his familiar F-sharp fingering on the black keys,
The lever would instantly translate that physical input into, say, the key of C or B flat or whatever he needed.
precisely. The sound the audience heard was transposed, but his hands never had to leave their comfort zone. It was an instant mechanical cheat that let him explore the entire harmonic spectrum.
It's essentially the ultimate musical shortcut. It allowed a creative mind, unburdened by technical difficulty, to focus entirely on melody and lyric.
And even though he did eventually learn to produce written music later in life, he famously stuck with his method, always dictating the final melody to a musical secretary.
What's maybe most fascinating is that he actually sought advice about this. He went to Victor Herbert, the famous light opera composer, and asked if he should get formal training.
And Herbert looked at Berlin, this raw, intuitive genius, and advised him against studying composition. He warned that theory might cramp your style.
That advice proved to be prophetic. By avoiding complex theory, Berlin was forced to keep his sound pure, direct, and focused on instant emotional resonance.
His philosophy was completely audience-centric. He said his aim was to reach the heart of the average American, that vast middle of the population.
Who he saw as the real soul of the country, not the highbrow or the lowbrow.
And to reach them, his style had to be simple, uncomplicated, and direct, written entirely in the American vernacular. He saw complexity as a barrier.
He was also really clear about the hierarchy of a hit song. He said, it's the lyrics that makes a song a hit, although the tune, of course, is what makes it last. The words had to connect first.
And this commitment to simplicity is what launched his career into the stratosphere with his first worldwide phenomenon, Alexander's Ragtime Band in 1911.
Berlin, barely out of his 20s, became an instant global celebrity.
But the journey of this song is a masterclass in the importance of lyrics. It was first introduced by the singer Emma Chorus. A Broadway producer, Jesse Lasky, picked it up, but only used it as an instrumental.
And it bombed.
Completely. Audiences were unimpressed, and it was quickly dropped. Berlin considered it a failure until he added the famous lyrics.
Once the words were there and the song was performed again in a different review, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Variety called it the musical sensation of the decade.
It's interesting, though, because music critics were quick to point out that musically, Alexander's Ragtime Band wasn't actually a true ragtime piece, right?
That's a key distinction. True ragtime, like Scott Joplin's work, relied on very strict, almost classical structures. Berlin's song was musically much closer to a march.
Right, it even quotes the bugle call Reveille in the old folk song Swanee River.
So why the title then, if it wasn't true ragtime?
Because Berlin borrowed the feeling and the rhythm of ragtime syncopation without sticking to the genre's rigid structure. It was looser, catchier, and infinitely more accessible to the average ear.
It essentially popularized the idea of ragtime for a mainstream audience. It revived the genre and sparked this international dance craze.
The craze was so pervasive that, predictably, it drew some pretty harsh criticism. The sources include this hilarious quote from a German newspaper calling ragtime a form of insanity and a public menace.
They worried the hysteria it produced could lead to idiocy.
The irony wasn't lost on Berlin, that the country his family had fled was now captivated by his music. He admitted he was flabbergasted by the global success.
And George Gershwin, recognizing its innovative spirit, called it the first real American musical work, praising Berlin for showing the way forward.
Building on this incredible momentum, Berlin quickly diversified. In 1914, he wrote his first complete score for a major ragtime revue called Watch Your Step,
which starred the decade's most famous dance couple, Vernon and Irene Castle. Variety hailed it as the first syncopated musical.
And this show gave us the foundational Berlin hit, Play a Simple Melody. What's important about this song is that it was the very first of his famous double songs,
where he wrote 2 distinct melodies and lyrics that could be sung at the same time, in counterpoint.
Exactly. This showed a real and sudden jump in his musical sophistication, proving he could handle complex structures through purely intuitive means.
But just as his career was taking off, he faced this immense personal tragedy.
In 1912, only 6 months after marrying his first wife, Dorothy Goetz, she died suddenly of typhoid fever.
which she contracted during their honeymoon in Havana.
This deep, acute grief produced his first serious ballad hit, When I Lost You. It was an immediate sensation, selling over 1 million copies almost instantly.
And the success of this song caused a fundamental creative shift in Berlin. He realized that the upbeat ragtime style was totally unsuitable for expressing serious romantic feeling.
It forced him to adapt and start writing the profound, heartfelt love songs that would define his later career.
By the time we get to 1919, he showed just how far he developed. A Pretty Girl is Like a Melody from the Ziegfeld Follies became one of his first big guns in the sophisticated theater world.
It was so immediately popular that it became the lead song for the musical and was then adopted as the permanent theme for all of Florence Ziegfeld's iconic revues.
The composer Alec Wilder, looking back, commented that the leap in style and sophistication between this song and his earlier work was just extraordinary to have happened in such a short time.
Berlin was moving rapidly from a Tin Pan Alley novelty writer to a true theatrical master.
Entering the Roaring Twenties, Berlin wasn't satisfied just writing music. He was becoming a full-fledged business mogul.
Right. In 1921, he made a landmark move, partnering with producer Sam Harris to construct the Music Box Theater on Broadway.
Located at 239 West 45th Street.
This move really spoke volumes about his ambition and his need for control. One of his biographers, David Leipold, notes it was the only Broadway house built specifically to accommodate the works of a single songwriter.
The theater acted as his personal laboratory. It housed his hugely successful Music Box Revue for 4 straight seasons, from 1921 to 1925.
By controlling the venue, he controlled the entire ecosystem. He was the owner, the producer, the composer, and he was intensely hands-on with every detail of the show.
From casting and costumes to the complex musical arrangements, he wasn't just selling songs, he was building a brand.
And meanwhile, the 1920s brought the personal drama that became a national media sensation, his second marriage.
In 1926, Berlin, a Russian Jewish immigrant who had started life in a tenement, fell passionately in love with Ellen McKay.
And Ellen was a young author and, critically, a Catholic heiress from one of the most socially prominent and fiercely traditional families in America.
Her father was Clarence McKay, the head of the powerful Postal Telegraph Cable Company, and he was, to put it mildly, absolutely furious about the match.
The press, of course, just ate this up. The Lower East Side boy versus the high society aristocrat was front-page news.
Clarence McKay vehemently opposed the marriage, famously vowing it would only happen over my dead body.
He tried everything to separate them, including sending Ellen off to Europe to get her away from Berlin's influence.
But Berlin pursued her across the Atlantic not just with daily letters, but with musical devotion. He wooed her with songs like Remember and All Alone, sent over the airwaves.
And she wrote him daily letters in return, proving the parental opposition was futile.
Ultimately, the romantic connection proved stronger than the social barriers. They eloped in 1926, choosing a simple, discreet civil ceremony at the municipal building.
Just to escape the relentless media circus.
Yeah.
And as a wedding present, Berlin demonstrated both deep love and immense practicality.
He gifted Ellen the full publishing rights to his classic song, Always.
Which was an immediate guaranteed financial safety net for her, ensuring she had a steady income no matter what happened with her family or his career.
The initial rift with Clarence McKay only began to mend after a devastating tragedy struck the young couple.
The death of their infant son, Irving Berlin Jr., on Christmas Day, 1928, less than a month after his birth. The shared sorrow finally allowed for a tentative reconciliation.
And despite the tumultuous start, Irving and Ellen's marriage was one for the ages. They remained married for 63 years until her death in 1988.
And throughout all this personal drama, Berlin was just relentlessly defining the American songbook. The period from the 20s to the mid-30s saw him generate standards that are still ubiquitous today.
Let's talk about some of those hits. Take What'll I Do? From 1924. This was a classic ballad of longing and loneliness.
A massive hit for Paul Whiteman's orchestra, and later became standard repertoire for vocal giants like Nat King Cole and Frank Sinatra. It perfectly captured the sophisticated sadness of the jazz age.
Then we have Blue Skies from 1926. This song was born of pure, unadulterated joy.
He wrote it immediately after the birth of his first daughter, Mary Ellen Barrett. That feeling of optimism is crystallized in the lyric, "Blue days, all of them gone, nothing but blue skies from now on."
And it's interesting to note the cultural connection of this song, its inherent musical sensibility, that mix of simple optimism with a complex underlying emotion. It resonated deeply with Jewish American culture.
It signaled hope after dark times, a theme that really speaks to the immigrant experience.
And its debut was utterly iconic. In 1927, Al Jolson performed Blue Skies and the Jazz Singer.
Not just any film, it was the very first feature sound film. The song was instantly catapulted into cinema history.
And to show its timeless quality, Willie Nelson took it to #1 on the country chart 52 years later in 1978.
Then there's the sophisticated, intricate syncopation of Puttin' on the Ritz from 1928. This song required real musical precision.
It's permanently associated with glamour and escapism. Fred Astaire famously sang and danced to it in the 1946 film Blue Skies.
It was later featured in Mel Brooks's Young Frankenstein in 1974. But the longevity statistic that truly defines Berlin's reach is that Puttin' on the Ritz was a #4 hit for the synth-pop artist Taco in 1982.
When Berlin himself was 95 years old, the material simply never aged.
That ability to transcend genres and decades is a recurring theme. Jumping to 1932, we find Say It Isn't So. This song was introduced by Rudy Vallee on his popular radio show.
And the romantic lyrics were so potent that they were actually credited with saving Vallee's own marriage.
The early 1930s also saw Berlin return to the stage with powerful themed work. As Thousands Cheer from 1933 was a hugely successful review.
Where, conceptually, each musical number was framed as a newspaper item or headline. This gave us hits like the perennial Easter Parade and the jazz staple Heat Wave.
But the show also contained a moment of profound, startling social commentary that often gets overlooked. I'm talking about the powerful song, Supper Time.
This was not standard Broadway fare. Supper Time was an extremely serious, stark song about racial violence, directly inspired by a newspaper headline about a lynching.
And the power of the piece was undeniable, especially when performed by the legendary Ethel Waters. The lyrics tell the story of a black woman waiting for her husband, only to be told he's been lynched.
Waters herself emphasized the gravity of the piece, stating that the song told the whole tragic history of a race.
That's incredibly powerful, and a statement that must have been highly charged in 1933 America. It speaks volumes about Berlin's long-standing advocacy for civil rights.
And his willingness to use his platform, even in a comedy review, to force audiences to confront ugly realities.
It showed that his simple style could convey profound, complex emotions.
As the decade progressed, the focus shifted to Hollywood. Top Hat, in 1935, marked the beginning of a fantastic series of Berlin film musicals, often starring the perfect pair, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers.
Berlin provided an entirely new score for Top Hat, with iconic hits like Cheek to Cheek. These films didn't just use old songs. They relied on his ability to craft music that was inextricably linked to the visual rhythm of the dancers.
We mentioned earlier that Berlin was an intensely grateful and patriotic citizen, and this was evident from the very start of his career. It began bubbling up during World War I.
Absolutely. When the U.S. declared war in 1917, he felt a genuine sense of civic duty. He immediately wrote For Your Country and My Country, and a song aimed at unifying immigrant groups titled Let's All Be Americans Now.
And when he was drafted into the U.S. Army at age 30, it was major news. The headlines screaming, "Army takes Berlin," were not lost on anyone.
But the Army quickly recognized the value of their famous new private. He was assigned the task of boosting troop morale at Camp Upton.
So he composed and starred in an all-soldier musical review called Yip Yip Yefenk in 1918.
The show was a massive success. It played on Broadway and raised $150,000 for a service center, a huge sum at the time.
It featured lasting hits like Mandy and Oh, How I Hate to Get Up in the Morning, which Berlin often performed himself, even though he disliked being in the spotlight.
But here is the fascinating twist of fate, the crucial link between WWI and WWII. Berlin wrote another song for that 1918 review, a patriotic piece called God Bless America.
But he didn't use it.
No. He felt the tone, which was more solemn and hymn-like, didn't quite fit the lighthearted, upbeat tone of the show. So he simply filed the sheet music away in a trunk.
So for 2 decades, God Bless America just sat there, dormant.
That's a powerful lesson in timing, isn't it? The song was ahead of its time. It wasn't until 1938 that the moment for that song finally arrived.
Exactly. The famous singer Kate Smith needed a new patriotic song to perform on her radio show to mark the 20th anniversary of Armistice Day.
Berlin, searching through his archives, rediscovered the old tune. He slightly revised the lyrics and introduced God Bless America to the world.
And the reaction was immediate. This was 1938, a time when global tensions were rising dramatically. Americans were looking for a statement of national unity.
His daughter, Mary Ellen Barrett, stressed that for her father, the song was very personal, a deep expression of gratitude.
I mean, think about his journey. Fleeing persecution, growing up poor, achieving massive success. Berlin himself said he owed what I have and what I am to the country. The song was a thank you note.
Because of that deep personal connection, it quickly transcended mere popularity and became known as the second national anthem, especially once America officially entered World War II.
And his financial decision regarding the song perfectly mirrored his patriotism.
Famously, he assigned all royalties from God Bless America to the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. This single selfless act has earned those organizations millions over the decades, over $10 million by 2005 alone.
That's a staggering charitable legacy tied to a single song. And in recognition, he was awarded a special Congressional Gold Medal by President Eisenhower in 1954.
And we see the song's enduring relevance even today. Its popularity resurged powerfully after 9/11. It was sung by members of Congress on the Capitol steps.
And it's used by sports teams, most famously the Philadelphia Flyers, and was spontaneously sung by the 1980 Miracle on Ice U.S. Olympic hockey team.
When Pearl Harbor brought the U.S. into World War II, Berlin, now in his 50s, immediately sprang back into action, focusing his entire energy on the war effort.
He continued his pattern of assigning royalties to government agencies. He wrote Any Bonds Today for the Treasury Department, Angels of Mercy for the Red Cross.
Even a cleverly rhymed song encouraging fiscal compliance, I paid my income tax today, also for the Treasury.
But his greatest contribution was the stage show and later film, This Is the Army.
This was a colossal undertaking, a morale-boosting revue with an all-soldier cast of 300 men, for which Berlin wrote nearly 36 new songs. But his involvement went way beyond composing.
He personally supervised the entire production and, despite his age and status, he toured extensively with the cast for 3.5 grueling years.
They traveled globally, often near battle zones in North Africa, Italy, and the Pacific. And here's the critical detail. He refused to take a salary or even claim expenses for his work during that entire period.
That sacrifice amplified the show's charitable impact. It was adapted into a 1943 film starring a recognizable young Army lieutenant who would later occupy the White House, Ronald Reagan.
Between the stage show and the movie, they raised over $10 million for the Army Emergency Relief Fund.
And on a social note, this production was pioneering. The Army featured the first integrated division Army unit in the United States,
which allowed black and white soldiers to perform together on the same stage at a time when the entire U.S. military remained strictly segregated. This cemented his reputation as an advocate for civil rights.
For this unparalleled contribution, he was awarded the Medal for Merit by President Truman. He was genuinely viewed as a national asset.
Even after the intense multi-year commitment to This Is the Army, Berlin was pulled back into the spotlight for what many consider his ultimate masterpiece, Annie Get Your Gun in 1946.
And the story of Annie Get Your Gun is incredible because he wasn't the original choice.
Not at all. The job became available tragically when the composer Jerome Kern died suddenly. Producers Rodgers and Hammerstein were desperate to save the show, and they persuaded Berlin to take over the score.
That seems like a massive risk. Berlin was famous for writing uptown, jazzy New York hits. How did they convince him? He initially refused, right?
He did. He claimed he knew nothing about hillbilly music and felt unqualified to write for a rustic sharpshooter like Annie Oakley.
But Rodgers and Hammerstein were persistent. They showed him the core of the story was about a universal conflict, love versus career, that Berlin knew intimately.
He finally agreed, and clearly he was wrong about his limitations because the show was an undeniable triumph. It ran for an astonishing 11,147 performances.
It became his most successful score and his biggest box office success. It cemented Ethel Merman's career as a star.
And the show gave us, perhaps, the ultimate up-tempo show tune. There's no business like show business.
And there's a fascinating anecdote about this song. Berlin actually almost left it out of the score.
He did. He mistakenly thought the producers weren't enthusiastic about it. Can you imagine removing that song from the American lexicon? Of course, it became Merman's signature piece.
And another iconic piece was born almost spontaneously. The crucial duet, Anything You Can Do, I Can Do Better.
That's pure Berlin ingenuity. The director and Hammerstein were discussing how they urgently needed a competitive duet. Berlin, simply overhearing them, walked off and wrote the song just a few hours later.
The quality of the score was undeniable. Even the famously rigorous Stephen Sondheim praised the show's sophistication, calling "You Can't Get a Man with a Gun" as good a comic song as has ever been written by anybody.
The show marked a profound development. The music didn't just entertain, it successfully combined character and plot, advancing the narrative, a critical step in the evolution of the American musical.
Speaking of ultimate hits, we cannot discuss his peak career without the song that is the very definition of the American holiday season, White Christmas from 1942.
Introduced by Bing Crosby in the film Holiday Inn, this track achieved a level of commercial success that is almost impossible to replicate today.
Crosby's version holds the undisputed record as the best-selling single of all time, selling over 50 million copies. 50 million.
Why did this song, above all others, strike such a powerful chord?
It was timing and simplicity combined with emotional depth. Music critic Stephen Holden said it evokes a primal nostalgia, a pure childlike looking for roots, home, and childhood.
And the context of its 1942 release is critical. World War II had just pulled millions of young men overseas.
Richard Corliss noted that the song connected profoundly with GIs who were away from home for that first winter of the war. It gave voice to the specific ache of separation.
The poet Carl Sandburg famously observed that the song captured the feeling of being a little sad and a little lonesome without being sickly about it. It was perfectly pitched.
And the song earned Berlin the Academy Award for Best Original Song, which leads us to a truly bizarre piece of Hollywood lore.
The infamous Oscar moment.
Yes.
Berlin is the only person in the history of the Academy Awards to open the envelope and read his or her own name as the winner.
I have to stop you there. Can you imagine the internal panic? He literally handed the highest honor in the film industry to himself.
The ultimate awkward moment. It was so awkward, in fact, that the Academy changed the rules the very next year to prevent it from ever happening again.
It's a hilarious, slightly embarrassing footnote attached to the biggest hit in recording history.
And if you analyze the lyrics, you see his philosophy of simplicity executed perfectly. White Christmas contains only 8 sentences in the entire song. It's direct, concise, and emotionally devastating.
Berlin maintained his successful run through the early 1950s with Call Me Madam, again starring Ethel Merman. That was his second greatest box office success and earned him a Tony.
However, the magic didn't last forever. Mr. President in 1962, his final stage musical, was less successful. That prompted his official retirement from composing at age 74.
His final published composition was An Old-Fashioned Wedding for the 1966 revival of Annie Get Your Gun. After that, he maintained a very low public profile.
He spent his final decades in his New York townhouse, although he diligently maintained control of his massive music publishing company until the very end.
When we synthesize the totality of Berlin's life and work, the word that continually surfaces is institution. He became a genuine fixture of the American identity.
Walter Cronkite articulated this perfectly. He said other nations are defined by their classical composers, but America is appropriately defined musically by this Russian immigrant. America has Irving Berlin.
He sits alongside the greatest chroniclers of American culture. Composer Douglas Moore included him with Stephen Foster, Walt Whitman, and Carl Sandburg as a great American minstrel.
A figure who caught, distilled, and immortalized in his songs what Americans say, what we think about, and what we believe.
And consider the volume again. An estimated 1,500 songs, 20 Broadway shows, 15 Hollywood films.
Songwriter Sammy Cahn provided that fantastic metric. If a man can point to 6 songs that are immediately identifiable, he has achieved something. Irving Berlin can sing 60 that are immediately identifiable.
That is an unbelievable density of enduring, recognizable hits. And his unique style also solidified his place as a pioneer.
He's broadly credited with helping to develop jazz music and for his early, effective incorporation of Afro-American musical references into mainstream popular song.
George Gershwin provided great context, arguing that Berlin was the first to free the American song from the nauseating sentimentality that preceded him.
By perfecting an accessible form of ragtime, Berlin gave the U.S. its first germ of an American musical idiom. He professionalized American pop music.
And his influence extended far beyond the stage door. He was an intense civic actor, a staunch advocate of civil rights, recognized with honors from the National Conference of Christians and Jews.
His commitment to civil rights, visible in his integrated This Is the Army unit, and his willingness to address lynching in supper time, was so visible, in fact, that he became a target of the FBI.
J. Edgar Hoover continuously investigated him for years, trying to find some grounds for suspicion, but never succeeding.
And his famous patriotism was utterly unquestionable. He rejected tax shelters, famously saying, "I want to pay taxes. I love this country."
His habit of assigning profits from patriotic songs to charity or the government was unprecedented.
And he was devoted to the American political process, voting for both Democratic and Republican candidates. He even wrote the campaign song "I Like Ike" for Dwight D. Eisenhower.
One of the most unexpected yet legally profound parts of his legacy is in the area of copyright and free speech. This involves a landmark case from 1961.
That's right. Berlin's publishing group, fiercely protective of their catalog, sued Mad Magazine for copyright infringement.
Mad had published parody lyrics, taking his famous tunes and changing the words to be satirical.
The case, Irving Berlin et al. VEC Publications, Inc., was a crucial test of artistic freedom against property rights.
And he lost at every level. The courts ultimately established a strong precedent for the rights of parodists and satirists to mimic the meter and style of popular songs.
The quote from Judge Irving Kaufman is legendary, cutting straight to the heart of the issue. "We doubt that even so eminent a composer as plaintiff Irving Berlin should be permitted to claim a property interest in iambic pentameter."
Essentially, you can't copyright common musical rhythm. It was a key victory for free speech and artistic expression.
In the final analysis, we have to return to that consensus. Berlin took the vibrations emanating from the people, as Jerome Kern put it, and then gave them back simplified, clarified, and glorified.
Irving Berlin died peacefully in his sleep in his Manhattan home on September 20, 1989. He was 101 years old.
Broadway lights were dimmed in his memory, and his three daughters solidified his historical significance by donating his massive collection of 750,000 items, including his transposing pianos, to the Library of Congress.
What an astonishing, improbable journey. From Israel Berlin fleeing violent persecution in Russia, arriving at Ellis Island with nothing,
To Irving Berlin, sitting at his mechanical transposing piano, limited to the key of F sharp, yet writing the score for America's greatest romances, wars, and deepest holiday nostalgia.
his career is the ultimate expression of gratitude, a testament to the power of his chosen home. His songs transcended his own immigrant identity and became the musical shorthand for the nation itself.
He achieved his stated ambition. He reached the real soul of the country, capturing the simple sentiments that unite us.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Berlin was forced to leave Russia. He was restricted almost entirely to the key of F sharp, and he famously rejected formal training. If his musical talent had been conventionally developed, if he'd been taught to read and write complex music in every key, would that purity, that simplicity, that directness that spoke so universally to the average American, would it have been lost?
Was his profound technical limitation actually the very foundation of his inimitable simple genius? The immigrant who had to leave his home, yet proved that America was truly the place where an outsider's deepest feelings could become the nation's permanent and simplest soundtrack. Something to mull over until our next deep dive.